The main objective of the tutorial will be application of Evamix MCDM technique and glowworm optimization technique in hydroclimatic vulnerability analysis of islands. Actually, by vulnerability, I mean the vulnerability due to the extremities that is being observed in different hydrologic and climatic parameters due to abnormal climatic pattern and rapid but large scale urbanization. Islands are a mass of land which is covered by water in four side of or all side of the of its area. It is generally situated on uh, ocean or on riverbeds, mainly at the confluence of two rivers or confluence of rivers with the ocean. Example is delta. This Sundarban Delta is an example of island. Then Andaman, Nicobar Island, Lakshadweep Island, they are example of oceanic islands. So they are becoming vulnerable due to the impact of climate change as well as large scale urbanization because they are a very short form of mass compared to the mass of land mass of countries, and that is why they have also a very finite resource, natural resource. But the impact of climate change is rampant and observed in all type of landmass, be it country, be it island. But the severity of income will be more in case of island compared to countries. So in this study, we will try to devise a method by which multiple factors can be included in the hydroclimatic vulnerability analysis of islands. In this regard, we will use the Evamix MCDM method and glowworm optimization technique. Link to the detailed methodology of working with these two techniques are shared in the description of this podcast as well as the video. Now, what happened is, let us see how we will try to achieve it. So, the first step will be to selection of relevant parameters that can represent vulnerability of the islands. In this regard, we will try to discuss with different stakeholders and multidisciplinary experts, and we'll also refer to various literatures that are already published, government reports, seminar reports, webinar reports. So both literature and stakeholder survey will be conducted to find a set of parameters which is scientifically can be referred as features which can represent the vulnerability of islands. So this is our first step. Second step is selection of criteria based on which we will compare the parameters or features. So how to select the criteria? So generally we use a methodology that is known as PASTE. PASTE means P for political interference, E for environmental impact, S for socio-economic impact, T for technical impact. So, based on political impact, environmental impact, socio-economic impact, and technical impact, all these parameters or features will be compared with each other to find the priority of each of the parameter in representing the hydroclimatic vulnerability of islands. Okay, so this is the basic process or basic working principle of any multi-criteria decision making method. So if you search in the internet for multi-criteria decision making method, the basic working principle that they will discuss is this. Okay, selection of relevant parameter which will represent the vulnerability, selection of criteria which will help you decide the weightage of significance or priority value of those features. That means, let me explain it a bit more. Even if there are 50 parameters which can represent the vulnerability, not all the parameters are equally significant or important. I think only 10 or 5 of them among all these 50 parameters or 60 parameters, they will really important. So in the present studies, what is happening is we are trying to give equal importance to all the 50 number or 60 number of parameters. Thereby, we are losing the focus on the real problem. We are missing the main parameters that is enough to represent the vulnerability. And moreover, if there is more number of parameters that can represent vulnerability and you include those parameters into your study, that implies that you have to collect data for all those parameters. And you know that data requirement takes time and money. The most important thing is money. More the data requirement, more money you will need to carry out the research. So that is why it is always better to to sort the parameters into the most significant ones only, right? We you have to select those parameters without which you cannot represent a vulnerability of idea. Impossible. Okay, so those parameters need to be identified first, then you can move ahead with your vulnerability analysis. Okay, so for this only, we will apply the Evamix MCDM method because nowadays, as you know, MCDM has proved its capability in finding the most significant parameters among all the relevant parameters. So, and they are very much popular nowadays. So, feature selection, which was a very troublesome objective of any study, and which are done mainly previously done mainly with the help of the expert and views and based on experience only. Nowadays, at least, there are some objective methods like MCDM techniques which streamline the process, right? So, to make the method of parameter selection objective, which will not change with the change in the source of retrieving information related to the importance of the parameter, MCDM application of MCDM is best. Among all the MCDM, HP, NP, Electre, Promethi, these are all already widely used. Evamix is the very modern technique. It is recently being developed. Although I am saying recently, but it is developed in the year of around 2011 or 12. So, but it is relatively new, at least modern to AHP, NP, all this thing. So we are using here Evamix technique, and glowworm optimization technique is another technique that we will use. This is an example of nature-inspired optimization technique. This glowworm optimization technique is inspired from the behavior of glowworm in finding food source. Okay, so glowworm, all of you know, you can find them in gardens, forest, and all this. Even in cities also, if you light a lamp, all those glowworms will come to your light source, and they will circulate there until the light is on. Once you shut down the light, they will go away. So there are various aspects of it that is already discussed in the tutorial that I have already made, and I will share the link in the description. Okay. But the purpose of Evamix MCDM, this tutorial on Evamix MCDM is also shared in the description. This Evamix MCDM will select the most significant parameters out of all the relevant parameters. And after then, what will happen? We will develop an index which will be referred as index of vulnerability. Okay. So this index of vulnerability will actually depict the level of vulnerability that is observed in the island based on the data retrieved from that island. Okay. So how this index is developed? In the numerator, all the parameters which are directly or which are beneficiary to vulnerability. That means more the value of the parameters, more vulnerable the island is. Okay. So if it is directly proportional to vulnerability, it is beneficiary. If it indirectly or inversely proportional to vulnerability, then it is non-beneficiary parameters. So all the beneficiary will be kept in the numerator, all the non-beneficiary will be kept in the denominator. And the ratio of this beneficiary to non-beneficiary parameters will give you the index of vulnerability. That means if the value of this index of vulnerability is more in some island compared to the other island, then that island is more vulnerable compared to the other islands. Okay. Now, now what is happening here is that to analyze the vulnerability with the index, you need a threshold value also, right? So threshold value means a maximum value of the index of vulnerability, which indicates maximum vulnerability. And all the vulnerability that will be calculated for the islands, that will be compared with the maximum vulnerability to find out the relative vulnerability of all the islands. Because if you do not use any reference frame, then just finding the vulnerability is useless. Because what will happen? Suppose you have taken 5 islands, you find out the vulnerability index or index of vulnerability of all the 5 islands. What will happen? Among those 5 islands, you can rank the islands as per the vulnerability index. But once a new island comes in, sixth island, then again you will calculate vulnerability index of all these 6 islands, and then the rank may change. So this is not a very systematic approach. So that is why it is always better to keep a reference frame with respect to which you will compare the vulnerability of your island. Right? So that is extremely important. Some relative scale must be there to analyze or to get the exact information regarding vulnerability of the study area that you are dealing with. Okay, so that is why the maximum vulnerability is required to be identified. That is being how that is identified. First, what we'll do is we'll assume the magnitude of parameters. We'll assume the magnitude of parameters as a normalized magnitude where 0 and 1 depicts the minimum and maximum value for the beneficiary parameters and maximum and minimum value for the non-beneficiary parameter with respect to the vulnerability. Okay. Then these normalized parameter or normalized value of the parameters will be multiplied with the weightage of the parameters that was found uh, in the Evamix step, at the step where you applied Evamix. So at the end of the Evamix application, you'll get weightage of priority or weightage of significance for each of the parameter. So that will give you the weightage. You will multiply the normalized magnitude of all the parameter with its weightage, and then add each of the beneficiary parameter, and place that addition into the numerator, and each of the non-beneficiary parameters and place that to the denominator. So this product of priority, weightage of priority, and normalized magnitude of parameters, and which are after then added with each other, so and placed in the numerator for beneficiary and denominator for non-beneficiary is the index. That means the index of vulnerability is nothing but the summation of the product of weightage and normalized magnitude of each of the parameters, beneficiary parameters in numerator and non-beneficiary parameters in the denominator. Okay. Now what will happen? As you know, in case of optimization, there is a design value, a sorry design variable. There are constant to this design variable, and you can either maximize or minimize or achieve a target value by applying a specific optimization technique. So you please refer to my tutorial on optimization. That will also be shared in the description. So what I will do is we'll assume the magnitude or normalized magnitude of each of the parameter to be the design variable. Weightage you have already got. Design variable, the normalized magnitude is what we want to know, right? To find the maximum vulnerability. So that we have made as design variable. Weightage of that variable is already known. So the product and summation of the product of all beneficiary divided by all non-beneficiary is the index. So this index is the objective equation. Normalized magnitude of the each of the parameters is the design variable. Now this design variable will of course have a constant, and as you know it will be 0 to 1. 0 is the lower bound and 1 is the upper bound. And optimization technique or optimization program that we will use here is glowworm optimization technique. Okay, because why we are using glowworm optimization? Because it's a very well-known and popular meta-heuristic optimization technique. The advantage of meta-heuristic optimization technique is it starts to optimize from any space of the domain of feasibility. It is not like it will be start from the beginning or start from the end, which is the case for classical optimization technique. In case of meta-heuristic optimization technique, it will randomly select a point and it will start to optimize. So that way, it considers all the possible solution of the optimization problem. Okay, so that is why we are using GWO. Now, after doing the optimization, and mind it, we are doing a maximization because we want to know the maximum vulnerability with the help of the index. So once we reach that point, maximum point, we get the maximum vulnerability. Now you just take the data from individual islands, that is the case study islands of the your magnitudes of your parameters, and then normalized it, put it into the index. Index will give a value. You compare with the maximum vulnerability to find the relative vulnerability of each of the island, and that relative vulnerability of each of the island will provide you that how much hydroclimatic vulnerability is there in your island that you have selected as your study area. Okay, so as a conclusion, you will receive which island is how much vulnerable, represented by the relative vulnerability. And note, as you are using a relative vulnerability, this analysis will never change even if you introduce another island. Suppose there are 10 islands, you can introduce 12 islands, still the relative vulnerability will be same. Okay, so this is what is required. So I have provided the tutorial of Evamix, I have provided the tutorial of GWO, I have provided the tutorial of optimization. Now you have to apply all this thing and try to find the vulnerability of any selected island. You can select island from Sundarban, you can select island from Andaman, you can select islands from Lakshadweep, and do an analysis. First, to submit the result, will get an e-certificate from me, e-certificate of accomplishment of this tutorial from me. And not only that, you will also become one of the co-author of any paper published from this tutorial. So you have a scope to publish a paper, you have a scope to get the certificate, and uh, in addition to these two important achievements, you will also learn how GWO and Evamix techniques can be utilized for vulnerability analysis of islands. Remember, vulnerability analysis of island is a relatively new concept. It is not practiced much, or not many authors have attempted that till now, till today. So you can easily opt for this study. And I have given you the idea, I have given you the tutorials. So first, to submit the results, I am not uh, saying anything about the study area. You can take any study area, any islands in India, in world, anywhere. I have no specific requirement that you have to do it for Sundarbans, you have to do it Andaman. No, you can take any island. You apply this technology, this technique, this procedure to analyze the vulnerability and submit the result to me. First to submit the result will receive the e-certificate, and he will be eligible to become a co-author of any paper that will be published from this concept. Okay, so that's all for today. See you in the next episode of the podcast.